Get out. Right now. That was the last thing my uncle said before he slammed the door in my face. My suitcase tipped over on the porch, spilling everything I owned onto the concrete: clothes, papers, my laptop with a cracked corner. My aunt stood behind him, arms crossed, lips tight, watching like this was a scene she'd rehearsed. No hesitation. No guilt. Just cold relief. "You're not our responsibility anymore," she added. "You're an adult. Figure it out." I remember my hands shaking as I bent down to grab my things. It was already dark. My phone buzzed, 2% battery. No car. No cash, no plan. Just the echo of their words ringing in my ears. "You should have thought about this earlier," my cousin muttered before the door locked. I stood there for a second, frozen, staring at the house I'd lived in for years. The lights inside were still on. Dinner smells floated through the window. Life going on without me, instantly, effortlessly. That's when it hit me. They weren't kicking me out because they had to. They were doing it because I was inconvenient. I dragged my suitcase down the driveway, fighting tears, my chest tight like I couldn't breathe. I had nowhere to go. No one to call. And the people who were supposed to be family had just erased me from their lives like I never mattered. I didn't know it then, standing on that sidewalk with everything I owned at my feet. But that night would become the moment everything changed. And one day, they would come back. Begging. I ended up living with my aunt and uncle because I didn't have a choice. After my mom passed away, my life unraveled fast. My dad had been out of the picture for years, and suddenly I was 21, grieving, broke, and trying to finish college while working part-time. Linda and Robert, my mom's older sister and her husband, offered to help. At least, that's how they framed it. At first, I was grateful. They gave me a spare room, told everyone how generous they were for taking me in. But behind closed doors, it was clear I wasn't family. I was a burden with an expiration date. Every favor came with reminders. Every meal came with comments about how much I ate. Every mistake was proof that I was just like my mother, emotional and irresponsible. They controlled everything. My schedule. My money. Even my mail. If I questioned anything, I was told I should be thankful I wasn't homeless. My cousin, Ashley, treated me like an embarrassment. She rolled her eyes when I spoke, corrected me in front of others, joked about how I'd probably fail out anyway. Linda laughed along. Robert stayed silent, which somehow felt worse. I stayed because I was scared. I had no savings. No backup plan. No one waiting to catch me if I fell. And they knew it. That's what made me vulnerable. They weren't helping me out of kindness, they were helping because it gave them power. And the moment I stopped being useful, the moment I became inconvenient, they took it all away. The betrayal didn't happen suddenly. It built up in small, calculated moments, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room, looks exchanged over my head, a sudden tension I couldn't explain. I felt it before I understood it. The final straw came over something small. Almost ridiculous. I came home one evening to find Linda sitting at the kitchen table with my bank statement printed out in front of her. My stomach dropped instantly. "You've been spending irresponsibly," she said, tapping the paper. "Coffee, rideshares, takeout. Do you think money grows on trees?" "That's my account," I said quietly. "Why are you going through my things?" Her face hardened. "We let you live here. That makes it our business." Robert walked in then, arms crossed. Ashley stood behind him, filming on her phone, like this was entertainment. They accused me of lying about my finances. Of hiding money. Of taking advantage of them. When I tried to explain, they talked over me, raising their voices until mine disappeared completely. Linda claimed I'd promised to contribute more. Robert said I'd been disrespectful for months. Ashley laughed and said, "Honestly, we've all been tired of you." That was the moment I realized, they weren't confused. They had decided. No matter what I said, the outcome was already chosen. They needed a reason to justify what they wanted to do. And in that kitchen, surrounded by people who had watched me struggle and said nothing, I understood something terrifying. I was no longer a niece. I was a problem they were finally ready to remove. They didn't give me time to process anything. Linda stood up from the table and said it like she was reading a grocery list. You need to be out by tonight. I actually laughed at first. A short, disbelieving sound. Tonight? I have class tomorrow. I don't even. That's not our problem, Robert cut in. You've overstayed your welcome. I asked if I could stay a few days. Just enough time to find somewhere else. I promised I'd work extra shifts. I offered to pay more rent. I swallowed my pride and begged. Linda shook her head. We're done enabling you. Ashley dragged a trash bag into my room and started throwing my clothes into it like she couldn't wait. When I protested, Robert told me not to cause a scene. I wasn't allowed to take everything. They kept my laptop charger. My documents. Some of my mom's things that I'd stored in the closet. When I asked for them, Linda said, "We'll mail them when we have time." They never did. By the time I was pushed out the front door, my wallet was nearly empty. My phone was dying. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip my suitcase. No one hugged me. No one said goodbye. The door closed, the lock clicked, and that was it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the house that had never really been mine, realizing I had no shelter, no safety net, and no family left to call. I felt small, disposable, and completely alone. But what hurt the most wasn't the fear. It was knowing they watched me walk away, and felt relieved. The first night, I slept on a bench at the bus station. I told myself it was temporary, just until morning, but the truth was I had nowhere else to go. I was too ashamed to call friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Too proud to explain how fast my life had fallen apart. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me flinch. I kept my suitcase wedged under my legs, my arms wrapped around it like it could disappear if I let go. By morning, my phone was dead. I spent the day walking. Libraries. Coffee shops. Anywhere warm. I counted every dollar, skipping meals, convincing myself hunger was easier than asking for help. I felt invisible. People rushed past me like I didn't exist. No one knew that less than 48 hours earlier, I'd had a bed, a home, a family, or at least the illusion of one. The shame was suffocating. I replayed every argument in my head, wondering if I'd deserved it. If I'd been too much. Too needy. Too weak. That thought hurt almost as much as the abandonment. I showered in gas station bathrooms. Charged my phone wherever I could. Applied for jobs I never thought I'd take. Smiled at strangers while my chest ached constantly. Every night, the fear crept in harder. What if this was it? What if this was how my story ended, quietly, on the margins, forgotten? But somewhere beneath the exhaustion and humiliation, something stubborn stayed alive. I refused to disappear. Even if no one else believed I mattered, I decided, for the first time, that I would. Help came from the last place I expected, someone who barely knew me. On my third night, while I was sitting in a 24-hour diner nursing a single cup of coffee, a woman slid into the booth across from me. Her name was Karen. She worked nights there and had noticed me coming in every evening, quiet, exhausted, always counting change. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said gently, "but you shouldn't be alone right now." I broke. Not dramatically. Just tears I'd been holding back spilling onto the table. She didn't rush me. She didn't judge. She just listened. Karen let me sleep on her couch that night. One night turned into 3. She helped me find a cheap room for rent through a coworker. Gave me a phone charger. Drove me to job interviews. Another unlikely ally showed up too, my old professor, Dr. Reynolds. I emailed him out of desperation, explaining I might have to drop out. Instead, he connected me with a campus job and emergency housing resources I didn't even know existed. No lectures. No pity. Just help. That's when it hit me, strangers treated me with more humanity than my own relatives ever had. Each small act felt like oxygen. Proof that I wasn't broken. That I wasn't invisible. That I was worth helping simply because I was human. For the first time since being thrown out, I slept without fear, and quietly, something inside me began to shift. Maybe I wasn't the problem after all. Rebuilding didn't happen in a dramatic montage. It was slow. Boring. Exhausting. I worked 2 jobs, mornings on campus, evenings at a grocery store. I studied between shifts, ate cheap meals, and learned how to stretch $10 like it was $100. Every dollar I saved felt like a small victory. There were days I wanted to quit. Days when my body ached and my mind replayed Linda's voice telling me I'd never make it on my own. That I'd come crawling back. That I'd fail. Instead, I kept going. I learned discipline because I had no other choice. I learned to rely on myself, to show up even when no one was cheering. To do things scared. Emotionally, something changed too. I stopped begging for approval that was never coming. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. Therapy helped. So did journaling, writing down my fears, then watching them slowly lose their power. I began to trust my own judgment. The more stable my life became, the quieter the noise in my head grew. I wasn't thriving yet, but I was building something real, something that didn't depend on anyone's permission. And the strangest part? The further I got from them, the lighter I felt. I didn't miss the house, I missed the version of myself I was becoming, someone who wasn't afraid of being alone. That was the foundation. And it held. The transformation didn't announce itself. There was no single moment where I suddenly felt successful. It revealed itself quietly. I moved out of the rented room into my own small apartment. Nothing fancy, just a studio with creaky floors and sunlight that hit the window in the late afternoon. But it was mine. I paid the rent with money I earned. I locked the door at night knowing no one could take it from me. School stabilized. My grades improved once survival wasn't my only focus. Professors noticed. One recommended me for an internship that turned into a full-time offer after graduation. For the first time, my future wasn't just a vague hope, it was a plan. I built routines. Savings. Credit. Confidence. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped expecting disaster every time something went right. I learned how to exist without constant fear. Emotionally, I became independent too. I no longer needed someone to tell me I was doing okay. I could feel it. I trusted my instincts. I set boundaries without apologizing. I chose people who showed up instead of tearing me down. And slowly, I became someone my old relatives wouldn't recognize. Not because I was rich or powerful, but because I was no longer breakable. They thought kicking me out would ruin me. What it actually did was remove the last thing holding me back. And while they went on with their lives believing I'd disappeared, I was becoming everything they never expected. At some point, I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a long message explaining my pain. I simply went quiet. I changed my number. Blocked emails. Removed myself from family group chats I'd been ignored in anyway. It wasn't dramatic, it was necessary. At first, the silence felt heavy. Like guilt. Like I was doing something wrong by choosing myself. Years of conditioning told me I was being selfish, ungrateful, cruel. But with time, that voice faded. Without their constant judgment, my thoughts became clearer. I stopped replaying conversations. Stopped rehearsing what I'd say if I ever saw them again. I focused on the life in front of me instead of the people behind me. Emotionally, I moved on in ways I hadn't expected. I laughed more. Slept better. Felt lighter. The absence of chaos felt like peace. I didn't hate them. I just didn't need them. And in that silence I realized something powerful: cutting contact wasn't about punishment. It was about choosing calm over chaos. Truth over gaslighting. Growth over guilt. They had made their choice when they closed the door on me. Now, I was making mine, and for the first time, it felt like freedom. The first message came late at night. I almost didn't recognize the number. "Hey, it's Linda. We need to talk." My stomach tightened instantly. It had been years, actual years, of silence. No check-ins. No apologies. No, "Are you alive?" And now, suddenly, they needed to talk. I didn't reply. The next day, there was a voicemail. Her tone was different. Softer. Almost nervous. "Something's come up," she said. "It's kind of urgent. Family matters." That's when I knew. People like Linda don't reach out unless they want something. A week later, Robert emailed me from an old account I'd forgotten to block. Short. Direct. Uncomfortable. "We heard you're doing well. We're proud of you. Can you call us?" Proud. The word made my chest burn. Then came Ashley. A text pretending nothing had ever happened. A smiley face. A casual "miss you," like she hadn't thrown my clothes into trash bags and watched me leave with nothing. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't acknowledge the past. They circled around something unspoken, testing the waters, waiting to see if I'd respond. And in that moment, reading their messages from the safety of my own apartment, I felt something I never expected. Not fear. Not anger. Control. Because for the first time, they were the ones reaching out, and I knew, whatever they were about to ask, they weren't calling from a place of love. They were calling because they needed help. And this time, the door wasn't theirs to close. It didn't take long for the truth to surface. After a few ignored messages, Linda finally dropped the act. "I don't know how else to say this," she wrote, "but we're in a difficult situation." There it was. I agreed to a call, not because I owed them anything, but because I needed to hear it with my own ears. The moment I said hello, the excuses started spilling out. Robert had lost his job. Ashley's boyfriend had drained her savings. The house was in danger. Bills were piling up. Everything was temporary, unlucky, not their fault. Then came the pause. "You're doing well now," Linda said carefully, like she was stepping on glass. "We heard you have a good job. Your own place." I stayed silent. "We're family," she added quickly. "We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." Ask. Not apologize. Not acknowledge what they'd done. Just ask. They wanted money. Not a small loan, enough to get back on their feet. They hinted at staying with me for a while. Robert even mentioned how helpful my connections could be, since I'd always been good at figuring things out. I almost laughed. The same people who told me I'd never survive on my own were now asking me to save them. And what shocked me most wasn't their audacity. It was how natural it felt to them, like this outcome had always been the plan. Like I was still supposed to say yes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt them. I let them finish laying out their emergency like a sales pitch. Then I spoke. "Do you remember the night you told me to get out?" Silence. "The night you emptied my bag on the floor to make sure I wasn't stealing anything? The night you said I was a burden and you were done wasting money on me?" Linda sighed, annoyed. "That was years ago. You're holding on to things." "No," I said calmly. "I'm remembering things." Robert jumped in, defensive. "You're twisting it. We were trying to teach you responsibility." Ashley laughed nervously. "Yeah, you were always so dramatic." That's when something inside me finally settled. I listed everything. The threats. The locked door. The phone they took. The way no one answered when I called from a gas station at 2 a.m. with nowhere to go. Linda interrupted. We didn't think it would turn out like that. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't think about me at all. They shifted tactics instantly. Tears. Guilt. Blame. You survived, didn't you? Linda said. Look how strong it made you. I felt my chest tighten, not with pain, but clarity. My suffering wasn't a lesson. It was neglect. And for the first time, they couldn't talk their way out of it. For a long moment, no one spoke. They were waiting for me to soften. To apologize for making things awkward. To reassure them that I was still the same desperate girl they could push into a corner. I didn't. Linda finally asked, carefully, so, what are you saying? I leaned back in my chair. My apartment. My lease. My space. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm saying I won't help you. Robert frowned. You can't just turn your back on family. I smiled, not cruelly, not proudly. Just honestly. You already taught me how. Ashley scoffed. You owe us. If we hadn't kicked you out, you wouldn't be where you are now. That was the moment the balance fully shifted. I didn't succeed because you abandoned me, I said. I survived in spite of it. They looked uncomfortable now. Smaller. The confidence they'd walked in with was gone, replaced by calculation. They were realizing something new and terrifying. They needed me. And I didn't need them. Linda's voice softened, suddenly sweet. We're just asking for a little help. Temporary. I stood up. This conversation is over. They stared at me like I'd broken some unspoken rule. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted them. I had simply removed access. And that was power. Not revenge. Not shouting. Just the quiet knowledge that for the first time in my life, They didn't leave quietly. Robert muttered something under his breath as he walked out. Linda wiped her eyes dramatically, making sure I saw her cry. Ashley didn't look at me at all. She slammed the door hard enough that a picture on my wall tilted sideways. For a few seconds, I just stood there, shaking. Then my phone started buzzing. Missed calls. Text messages. Voicemails. The tone shifted fast. First came anger. You're heartless. How could you do this to us? Then guilt. Your aunt is sick. Family doesn't treat each other like this. And finally, panic, because reality was setting in. Without my money, Robert had to sell the truck he'd been pretending he could afford. Linda's friends started asking uncomfortable questions when she suddenly stopped hosting dinners and church events. Ashley, who had bragged about having connections, found out very quickly that I was the only one in the family who actually had any. I didn't interfere. I didn't celebrate. I just watched the truth spread on its own. They started calling relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, trying to control the narrative. But stories have a way of leaking. People remembered how I disappeared years ago, how no one could explain where I went. How suddenly I was selfish the moment I said no. The sympathy they expected never fully came. And for the first time, they were forced to sit with something they'd avoided for years. Their comfort had been built on my silence. And now that silence was gone. After they left my life for the second time, something unexpected happened. I felt light. Not relieved in a dramatic, victorious way. Not angry anymore. Just calm. For years, I thought forgiveness meant reopening the door. Letting people back in. Giving them another chance to hurt me so I could prove I was better than them. But I learned the hard way that forgiveness can exist without access. Closure doesn't require reconciliation. And family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by behavior. Being abandoned with nothing broke me in ways I didn't understand at the time. It rewired how I saw myself. It taught me fear, hyper-independence, and shame. But it also taught me resilience. It taught me how to survive without applause, without safety nets, without anyone clapping for my progress. And when they came back, not because they loved me but because they needed me, I finally understood something important. I didn't owe them the version of me they refused to protect. Saying no wasn't cruel. It was honest. It was the first time I chose myself without apology. If you're reading this because your family walked away when you needed them most, please hear this: their abandonment does not define your worth. Their failure to show up does not make you unlovable. And your success, emotional or financial, does not obligate you to rescue the people who left you to drown. Build your life quietly if you have to. Protect your peace fiercely. And never confuse access with love. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you do to them. It's the life you build without them.